right. So I'm going to go ahead and call our meeting to order. Thank you again for being here. My name is Nahal Apakji, and I'm a senior director with Kearns & West, and I will be facilitating this evening's meeting on Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. This is a public workshop for proposed designation of Tulare Lake Sub Basin as a probationary basin. And as you might have noticed at the registration, we do want to welcome you to take part in a poll. It shouldn't take more than a few minutes. And there was a QR code at the front of the room. It's also on the screen. So it's if you take a photo of the QR code, it'll take you straight to the website and you can fill out the poll. It just helps us get an idea of who all is in the room. And thanks to those of you who are completing the poll. And thank you again for joining the public workshop. I want to share a quick overview of our translation services. So today's workshop will be provided in both Spanish and English, and you might find that we pause intermittently to ensure that we're moving at the same pace as the interpretation team, who are based in the back in the booth over there. So for folks that that would like to use the Spanish interpretation service, there were some kits, some audio kits for you to pick up at the registration table. And you would click channel 2 to make sure that your device can access the Spanish language service. So I'll go on to the meeting objectives. So today's meeting objectives are to provide an opportunity for the public to learn about the draft staff report, which describes the actions staff recommend the State Water Board should take for the proposed designation of Tulare Lake Sub Basin as a probationary basin. To provide an opportunity for the public to interact with the State Water Resources Control Board staff and raise their questions and concerns. And to provide an opportunity for the public to provide verbal and written comments on the draft recommendation. We're encouraging the following meeting or community guidelines. We ask you to please engage respectfully and avoid personal attacks, verbally or in written comments. To please use the comment cards or a microphone to communicate your comments and or questions to the speakers. And for public feedback, we will have a question and answer portion, and we'll need to keep that portion somewhat brief to prioritize the comment period. If you have a question during the Q&A, I'll go over this again when we get there, but all you need to do is raise your hand and we will have two colleagues running through the aisle and with a microphone, and they will, if you could hold until they get to you with their microphone, they will be able to make sure that the rest of the room can hear your question. On the public comment portion, we'll go in the order of the queue, and we ask you to please put a circle at the top of your comment card. If you would like to be prioritized, we understand that many of you might have children at home or other obligations that need you to get home earlier and leave here earlier. So please just put a circle at the top of your card to indicate that you need to go first or earlier in the queue. Once you have completed your comment card or written your comment and your name, you hold your card up and the same runners would come over to you to receive your card, and then I will call on 3 people at a time to come up to the podium to make your comments. We may need to implement a timer to keep the comments within the time allotment that we have for this evening, and so I will just indicate to the audience whether or not we are going to implement the timer. So I will move on to the agenda. We'll start with opening remarks, and then we will hear about the groundwater and Tulare Lake Sub Basin background, followed by an overview of the state intervention under SGMA, plan issues described in the staff report, proposed requirements for groundwater extractors, and then we'll get into the public Q&A on the probationary hearing process, followed by the public comment period, and that will be it for today before we adjourn. So with that, I would like to welcome Chair Joaquin Esquivel, who will now open with some opening remarks. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nahal. I really appreciate your help in facilitating tonight's discussion. Good evening, everyone. My name is Joaquin. I have the honor of serving as chair of the State Water Resources Control Board. My remarks will be brief because we're really here to hear from you. We actually just wrapped up our workshop and board meeting earlier today and drove down, and I really want to acknowledge and thank Vice Chair Doreen Diadamo, Board Member Sean McGuire, and Board Member Laurel Firestone for joining as well, and hopefully really demonstrates the priority that this is to us. I know these conversations are sometimes fraught and sometimes not the easiest. There's a lot of uncertainty and concern around the future of our communities, how we continue to have the quality of life and the economies that we've all come to depend upon. I'm actually from the Coachella Valley, the eastern Coachella Valley. My grandparents were in agriculture. As I drove through and I came here today, I felt very at home, if a word is to be used there. And so I just wanted to say we appreciate your all attendance this evening. There's a lot of folks here. We want to get through everyone's comments, and we're here to listen. We're going to try to keep our presentation as quick as we can, but just to really set the groundwork for what's in the staff report and what we can all further discuss from there. The other thing that I want to note and acknowledge, though, is that the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act is about local control. And when you look at the work of the board, when you look at the intense work throughout water rights administration, water quality, drinking water, wastewater discussions, we're not looking to collect groundwater basins. We really depend upon your local leadership here. That is the ultimate goal. And so even with state intervention, even with these discussions, it's always in light of turning it back to the locals. And so thank you for this attendance, and really appreciate and look forward to tonight's discussion. Thank you. Nahal.
Thank you so much, Chair Esquivel. I wanted to just go over a couple housekeeping items that I failed to mention before. So as you'll notice on some of the name tags, we have color-coded dots. So if you would like to speak with a staff member of the water board, you can just look out for a blue dot. If you need to speak with someone who can speak Spanish, you look out for a red dot. And then the green dot indicates the members of the Kearns and West facilitation team. Also, I wanted to point out that we do have a few restrooms available. So there's one towards that side of the room. And then there are a few under the exit side sign in the back of the room. There's also a water fountain back there. So with that, I will pass it over to Natalie for a quick staff introduction.
Good evening. I'm Natalie Stork. I'm a program manager, and I'm here with Sarah Sugar, a senior environmental scientist, and Caroline Hackett, a water resource control engineer, and we are part of the State Water Board's program implementing the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. We are here today because the board will consider whether to adopt a probationary basin determination for the Tulare Lake Sub Basin in April of next year. Our 5-member board is appointed by the governor, and several members of the board are here with us today. I want to note that no decisions will be made today, And now Caroline will start us off with the presentation.
Thanks. Hi, again, I'm Caroline Hackett. I'm a water resources engineer on the groundwater team at the State Water Board, and I'll start the presentation with giving just some quick context to California groundwater and groundwater in the Tulare Lake Sub Basin. Groundwater is an essential part of California's water portfolio, with 80% of Californians relying in part or in whole on groundwater for their drinking water supply. During average water years, groundwater makes up 38% of the state water supply, but during times of drought, it makes up to 60% of our statewide water supply. As you can see in the figure on the screen, groundwater is used differently in different parts of the state, and the cornerstone for groundwater management in California is that local differences in groundwater require local management and solutions with oversight and guidance from state water agencies. Next slide, please. California's climate naturally shifts. Start that again. California's climate naturally shifts between wet and dry conditions, as we've all experienced. During dry years with less rainfall, we rely more on groundwater and pump more of it to make up the difference. At the time the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, or SGMA, was passed into law in 2014, the majority of the state was experiencing exceptional drought, the most severe category of drought conditions. SGMA was passed in order to establish plans for sustainable groundwater in our groundwater basins in California for the first time, especially in those groundwater basins that are critically overdrafted, which means that they have been severely depleted by pumping. Next slide, please. The Tulare Lake Sub Basin is a critically overdrafted basin, and it is surrounded by also critically overdrafted subbasins. Next slide, please. Groundwater in the Tulare Lake Sub Basin is managed by Just wait for the slides to catch up. Thanks. Groundwater in the Tulare Lake Sub Basin is managed by 5 groundwater sustainability agencies, or GSAs. From north to south, those are the Mid-Kings River, South Fork Kings, Southwest Kings, El Rico, and Tri-County Water Authority groundwater sustainability agencies. These 5 groundwater sustainability agencies collaborated to write one groundwater sustainability plan, or GSP, for the subbasin, which outlines how the GSAs will manage groundwater in the subbasin and bring the basin into a sustainable balance by 2040. The original sustainability plan was submitted in 2020, and the Department of Water Resources determined it to be incomplete based on 3 deficiencies. The groundwater sustainability agencies worked to make corrections to the plan, and a revised version of the sustainability plan was submitted in July 2022. The Department of Water Resources issued a final determination in March of this year, stating that the groundwater sustainability plan was inadequate and unlikely to achieve sustainability and resolve the critical groundwater overdraft in the sub-basin. Next slide, please. Okay, let's quickly go over what groundwater is. In the simplest terms, we can think of the Central Valley as a large bathtub full of soil, sand, clay, and rocks, also called sediments, with groundwater filling in the spaces in between sediments. The saturated sediment layers that hold usable amounts of groundwater are called aquifers, and in the Central Valley, different aquifers are separated vertically by clay layers. Rain falling on the land surface infiltrates through the soil and sediments to recharge the aquifers, as do streams carrying snowmelt from the mountains. Shallow groundwater can support vegetation and ecosystems near surface water bodies, and sometimes groundwater contributes to the water flowing in those streams and rivers. And humans, of course, pump groundwater to use for drinking water, agriculture, and industry. In the Tulare Lake Sub Basin, groundwater, of course, is especially important to agriculture. In the recent water year from October 2021 to September 2022, 94% of the groundwater that was extracted in this sub-basin was used for agriculture, while 4% was used for urban public water supply, and 2% of the groundwater pumped was used by rural domestic well owners. These extraction numbers were reported by the groundwater sustainability agencies for their recent annual report. In Tulare Lake, however, pumping has exceeded the natural and human-assisted recharge that occurs, and groundwater levels have been in decline for decades. Declining groundwater levels have required people to deepen their wells or drill new ones in order to reach groundwater at a greater depth. And the extraction of groundwater has caused other issues in the sub-basin as well. Next slide, please. Okay. This slide displays the result of a dry well susceptibility analysis that was done by the Department of Water Resources in collaboration with the State Water Board. The analysis looked at the declines in groundwater levels during the recent drought and predicted which domestic wells would be vulnerable to going dry during a future drought. So the lighter colored blocks represent fewer at-risk domestic wells per block, while the darker red colors represent blocks with a greater number of domestic wells that are at risk of going dry. The Tulare Lake Sub Basin has 698 domestic wells that are at risk of going dry in a future drought. This map also shows where 27 domestic wells did go dry in 2022. These were reported to the Department of Water Resources as part of a voluntary dry well reporting program. Next slide, please. Overpumping groundwater in the Tulare Lake Sub Basin has also resulted in land subsidence. Land subsidence occurs when large amounts of groundwater have been withdrawn from certain types of rocks, such as the fine-grained sediments that underlie the Tulare Lake Sub Basin. As water is removed from those spaces between the fine sediments, the sediment layers below ground can compact and the land surface sinks downward. Subsidence can negatively impact infrastructure such as canals and levees by reducing the capacity of canals and increasing flood risk. Subsidence can also cause a permanent reduction in how much groundwater the subbasin can hold. So this map displays INSAR data, or satellite data, that is compiled by the Department of Water Resources for the time period from June 2015 to January of 2023. The green color represents up to 1 foot of subsidence in the land surface elevation over this time period, while the orange color represents 5 to 6 feet of land sinking. The gray areas in the middle of the subbasin are places where no data is available at this time. So we can see that the northern region of the subbasin is already experiencing subsidence, and as a whole, the subbasin has, on average, subsided 1.8 feet over this time period. Now I'll pass it to Natalie to talk about the state's role in this basin.
Now that Caroline has talked about some of the issues in the Tulare Lake Sub Basin, I'm going to talk about the State Water Board's role in implementing the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act and what that could mean for this area. Next slide, please. The Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, which I may refer to as the law at times going forward, recognizes that groundwater is a resource that needs to be managed sustainably so that it's available for people to use in the future. Many basins in California are overdrafted, meaning that more water is being pumped out than is being replaced by natural processes. The Sustainable Groundwater Management Act required that 94 basins in California begin managing their groundwater. Next slide, please. As Caroline mentioned before, the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act required the formation of new local agencies who were responsible for writing and implementing plans to manage groundwater. The law required the Department of Water Resources to develop the framework for these plans, and they determine whether plans are adequate. If the Department of Water Resources decides that any plans are not sufficient for managing groundwater sustainably, the State Water Board is the backup plan and steps in to help basins get back on track. Next slide, please. So what is sustainability? Sustainability means the basin is being operated, within its sustainable yield and doesn't experience undesirable results. Undesirable results are significant and unreasonable occurrences of these 6 things here on the slide caused by groundwater conditions occurring throughout the basin. What's important is that sustainability is supposed to be determined by locals at the local level. Also, note that these new groundwater sustainability agencies don't have to address groundwater issues that were already occurring prior to 2015. The law focuses on issues from 2015 forward. Next slide, please. The law recognizes that where groundwater is not being managed sustainably, the state should step in to protect groundwater resources until local agencies are ready to manage it on their own. Next slide, please. Now, focusing on the board's role, here are a few key things to remember. The board only steps in when local efforts fail. We can't just step in whenever we want to. The board temporarily protects the basin until locals can come up to speed. Board actions are not a replacement for a groundwater sustainability plan. The backstop is triggered by deadlines and deficiencies, which is why we are here today. Next slide, please. This is the State Water Board's state intervention process. First, there is a trigger. In this case, it's the plan not being adequate. Then the board considers whether probation is warranted. This is where we are now. Then the board considers whether to put the basin on probation. If the basin is put on probation, then there is a period of at least a year to fix issues. If the issues aren't fixed, then the board can decide whether to adopt its own plan for the basin. At any time, if agencies think they have fixed issues, they can provide the new plan to the board for evaluation. If the plan is fixed, we can move the basin out of state intervention and back to the Department of Water Resources oversight. Next slide, please. If a basin is put on probation, first the board identifies the problems with the plan. Then agencies work during this time to fix issues while implementing the good parts of the plan. Many people who use groundwater will need to begin reporting how much they pump so the board can assess conditions. The board may require meters so that we can get accurate information. The board must also begin charging fees. The law states that the board must recover the costs of administering the program. Fees are not meant to be punitive. Next slide, please. Here's a bit more on extraction reports. Reports must be submitted annually, and they must include where each well is located, how much it can pump, how much is actually pumped on a monthly basis, where the water is used, and what it's used for. And reports must be filed online. Next slide, please. Here are fees that are charged with each required report. We have a base filing fee of $300 per well. Also, a volumetric fee, which for probationary basins is $40 per acre foot. There is an automatic late fee of 25% per month up to a cap. A few additional notes. Fees are subject to change. The board can require special studies that may incur additional costs if it needs additional information. And it's important to note that waivers are available to certain pumpers, such as people with low incomes and community water systems serving disadvantaged communities if they report on time. Note that most domestic well users will likely not have to report or pay fees. Next slide, please. Back to our process slide. We've discussed probation. Now let's discuss what happens if plans are not fixed. Next slide, please. After at least a year, the board can develop and adopt its own plan for the basin. This plan will have corrective actions, monitoring to see how the actions are working, a schedule for the corrective actions, and enforcement to ensure the plan is followed. The important thing is that the plan is meant to be temporary, so it likely won't include new groundwater recharge facilities or water treatment facilities. It would likely be focused on cutting back pumping. We hope that it doesn't get to this point. The goal is to get this basin and others back on track before we need to get to this. Now I'm going to hand it over to Sarah.
Thank you. I'm Sarah Sugar, as Natalie mentioned earlier, and next slide please. I'll be discussing the plan deficiencies that staff described in the draft staff report. So, the staff of the State Water Board are obligated to make recommendations to the board members regarding the Tulare Lake Sub Basin. At this point, Natalie, Caroline, and I will present an overview of staff's draft recommendations for the Tulare Lake Sub Basin. The information we are presenting is based on the information we have to date. We are hoping to learn more from this meeting. We intend to update the draft staff report, which includes these recommendations based on the comments and information we receive from our stakeholder meetings and from other comments during the public comment period. Next slide, please. We, the staff, not we, the board, recommend to the board that they designate the basin probationary. As Natalie described, a probationary designation would give local agencies time to fix their plan while the board collects information on groundwater pumping. Staff recommend probation because the plan, as written, would allow substantial impacts to people who rely on wells for drinking water. The plan would also allow land subsidence or the sinking of land due to pumping that could damage canals, levees, and other structures. I will note that the Tulare Lake groundwater sustainability agencies have already begun working to correct these deficiencies and meet regularly with state water board staff, but the state's evaluation is based on the revised groundwater sustainability plan adopted in July 2022. Next slide, please. If the board votes to designate the basin probationary, the board also has to identify the deficiencies with the plan and potential actions for correcting those deficiencies. Before Caroline and I dive into the deficiencies and potential actions proposed by staff and described in the draft staff report, I'll describe very generally how groundwater sustainability plans work. In general, these plans describe groundwater conditions, which describe the basin, sustainability criteria to better define the undesirable results or what the basin is trying to avoid, monitoring to measure how the basin is progressing towards its goals, and projects and management actions, how the basin gets to sustainability. This might include projects that bring in new surface water supplies or rules that restrict pumping, for example. Next slide, please. When the Department of Water Resources reviewed the Tulare Lake Plan, the department found problems with how the agencies plan to manage for declining groundwater levels, land subsidence, and water quality degradation when pollutants or other things in water get to levels that are less safe for drinking, irrigation, or other uses due to groundwater management. Board staff agree with the Department of Water Resources review, and the draft staff report describes significant deficiencies with the plan related to these three categories. Caroline and I will now describe these proposed deficiencies and potential actions to address them in more detail. Next slide.
Thanks, Sarah. I'll go over the issues identified by board staff regarding how the sustainability plan handles groundwater level management in the subbasin. Firstly, the plan does not sufficiently describe the impacts that the groundwater sustainability agencies are trying to avoid, such as how many wells may go dry or how far down groundwater levels can decline. Without clearly defining these undesirable results, the agencies won't be able to tell whether the plan is working. The plan, as written, would allow for significant and unreasonable impacts to shallow wells that are screened in the upper aquifer of the subbasin called the A zone, including around 377 domestic wells or urban drinking water wells. Currently, there's also limited monitoring of this shallow aquifer. Similarly, the plan has issues with the sustainability thresholds and the monitoring that are planned for the two deeper aquifers of the subbasin, called the B zone and the C zone. If the sustainability plan for a basin is likely to result in impacts to existing wells, the State Water Board expects to see a robust well impact mitigation program that describes the ways the groundwater sustainability agencies will support domestic well owners and water supply providers whose wells may go dry under the management plan described in the sustainability plan. The mitigation plan as submitted in the 2022 GSP lacks sufficient details. The Sustainable Groundwater Management Act requires that the long-term overdraft in the sub-basin be resolved by 2040. However, board staff have determined that the plan as written is not likely to halt the declining trend of groundwater levels in this sub-basin. Finally, the plan does not describe the effects of groundwater level management on the management plans for groundwater quality and subsidence in the sub-basin. For instance, declining groundwater levels may possibly increase contaminant levels in parts of the basin or cause contamination in new parts of the basin to occur. Managing groundwater in the deepest aquifer, the C zone, is critical to curb subsidence, the sinking of the land surface. Next slide, please. The draft staff report includes recommended potential actions for how the groundwater sustainability agencies can address the deficiencies in the sustainability plan as it's currently written. These actions are not required and are not the only way to resolve the plan's issues, but these are the ways that board staff suggest the plan be fixed by the agencies. Firstly, board staff recommend that the groundwater sustainability agencies explicitly describe the undesirable results that they want to avoid in sufficient detail to be able to assess the progress towards achieving the sustainability goal in the sub-basin. Part of this requires gathering additional information about pumping and groundwater levels in the 3 primary aquifers by improving the groundwater level monitoring network. Staff also recommend that the groundwater sustainability agencies commit to an accessible, comprehensive, and appropriately funded well impact mitigation program to address any impacts to drinking water wells resulting from this groundwater management plan. Staff recommend that the groundwater sustainability agencies explicitly plan ahead for a recurrence of drought conditions in the sub-basin and commit to pumping cutbacks or other demand management actions that will be necessary to achieve sustainability in the sub-basin by 2040. And finally, staff recommend that the groundwater sustainability agencies describe how management of groundwater levels will influence the subsidence and groundwater quality in the sub-basin in order to comprehensively manage groundwater in Tulare Lake. Now Sarah will talk about the plan's deficiencies regarding land subsidence.
Thank you, Caroline. Next slide, please. So again, as we've said a few times now, land subsidence is the sinking of the land surface due to pumping. As with declining groundwater levels, the plan doesn't clearly describe the undesirable results or what the agencies are trying to avoid. Without this, the agencies won't be able to tell whether the plan is working. The report also describes problems with the plan's quantitative criteria for subsidence, which just means the inches or feet the land will be allowed to sink in different areas. The way the plan came up with the numbers did not always clearly link with the effects the agencies were trying to avoid. The report also describes the plan talks about the importance of limiting subsidence near the California Aqueduct, which runs along the west side of the sub-basin and delivers water to many parts of the state. However, the plan doesn't specifically talk about how the groundwater sustainability agencies will control subsidence near levees or other canals important for protecting communities from flooding. Finally, as Caroline mentioned for water levels, the plan has potential projects and other types of actions the groundwater sustainability agencies may put in place to achieve sustainability. But the plan doesn't show a clear path for how the local agencies will stop subsidence or how they will respond if the land is sinking faster than it should. Next slide, please. The potential actions described in the draft staff report to correct these deficiencies for the groundwater sustainability agencies to 1, describe the undesirable results, the effects they're trying to avoid, in enough detail that the agencies will know whether the plan is working. Set quantitative criteria, again, the number of inches or feet that land is allowed to sink that avoids that undesirable results. Work with agencies that maintain levees or manage floods to better understand how subsidence could increase flood risk. And finally, adequately describe how the groundwater sustainability agencies will halt subsidence in the subbasin. Next slide, please. Finally, staff identified problems with how the sustainability plan addresses water quality degradation. There are many reasons groundwater quality can worsen, and not all of these are within a groundwater sustainability agency's control. However, pumping can worsen the quality of water at wells, for example, by bringing low-quality water closer to well screens or intakes. Recharge projects can also add pollutants or other chemicals to the groundwater basin. For the first bullet, again, the plan doesn't clearly describe the level of water quality degradation due to groundwater management that is significant and unreasonable. There are also many parts of the basin where the groundwater sustainability agencies aren't collecting groundwater quality information, or they're only collecting it once every few years, making it hard to understand what's going on with water quality. The plan also allows very low quality water to get even worse. And finally, the way the local agencies will check whether water quality degradation is getting to be significant and unreasonable requires many years of information. So problems could go unaddressed for a long time while they collect that information. Next slide, please. Potential actions to address these deficiencies are to describe the effects the groundwater sustainability agencies are trying to avoid, revise the criteria used to guide management in the basin to address those undesirable results, revise the monitoring plan to monitor more frequently and in more locations and aquifers, plan additional sampling when water quality is more degraded to avoid impacts to human health. And finally, if the plan allows water quality to worsen near drinking water wells, commit to accessible, comprehensive, and appropriately funded well mitigation programs. We want to note that there are existing water quality programs in the subbasin. However, the groundwater sustainability agencies have some obligation to cover water quality excuse me, issues that are outside the scope of these programs. Thank you. I'll hand it back to Natalie.
Thank you. In addition to the deficiencies already noted, staff have additional recommendations to the board. Next slide, please. If the board decides to put the basin on probation, staff recommend excluding household domestic well users from reporting and fees. The law does this by default, but gives the board the flexibility to include domestic well users in some circumstances. We recommend that the board stick with the default and exempt household domestic well users. We also recommend that for those who do have to report, we recommend moving the default reporting deadline forward by 2 months to December so that we can get necessary information sooner in case we need to develop our own plan. Staff recommend that anyone who pumps 500 acre-feet or more per year from the basin install a certified meter so that we can get accurate data. This should cover most of the groundwater pumped from the basin. The law allows the board some leeway to exclude areas of the basin from probation. Since there is only one plan for the basin and it's inadequate, as determined by the Department of Water Resources, we recommend that any probationary determination apply to the entire basin. That concludes our presentation on recommendations in the draft staff report. Next, I'll walk through the schedule leading up to a hearing. Next slide, please. Here is the schedule. On October 12th, we released the draft staff report and issued a hearing notice to cities, counties, our email mailing list, and the Department of Water Resources. On October 13th, we mailed the notice to all known pumpers in the basin. Our public comment period runs until December 11th. We are holding our stakeholder meeting here on November 8th, and we had one the previous Friday online. We will review all public comments submitted by the deadline and use this information to revise our draft staff report and potentially the recommendations within the report. We plan to release the final staff report in March of 2024, along with the draft resolution for the board to consider at the hearing. The hearing is scheduled for April 16th of next year, where the board will consider a probationary determination for the basin. Now I'll hand it back to Nahal.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Natalie and Sarah and Caroline, for the presentation. So that wraps up the presentation portion of this evening's workshop. And now we would like to open it up for the Q&A session to answer any clarifying questions that folks might have on the material that was presented today. So as I mentioned before, if you just raise your hand, we have a couple staff, John Coburn and Tim Chow. Just raise your hand and they will come over with a microphone. Also, I would like to invite one of our interpreter team members, Ed, to come up and help us out. Join me at this time to ensure that if there's any Spanish speaking questions, any questions from Spanish speakers that the rest of the group gets to hear. And, okay, actually I'm gonna start right here, if that's okay, and I invite Tim, if you have a microphone. You can use this orange one. There's a button. Okay, so John's on his way, so it's okay, Tim. Thank you. Go ahead, sir. And then, Tim.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Am I going ahead?
You can see if you would like to introduce yourself.
Yeah. Hello, my name is Ray Carlson. I'm the legal counsel for the Mid-Kings River GSA and for the Kings County Water District. And I have one question about funding. There's been discussion about well mitigation, especially in regard to the problems with small, shallow domestic wells, and there were bullet points on the slide about committing to well mitigation. So my question is, the only way I can see the funding coming about would be through assessments under Proposition 218. And since the money would be raised for a particular class of persons but levied on everybody, it's not clear to me that that process of raising the money and then expending it in that way would be consistent with Proposition 218, which, as I understand it, requires that the fees or assessments that are charged are to be only to be used for the payment of the services rendered by the recipients, whereas people who are not subject to small domestic well mitigation would be paying, but they wouldn't be receiving anything in return. So that's my issue. I don't know if there's any response to that. Thank you.
Thank you. Would any staff members like to respond?
Thank you for the question, Ray. I will say that the need to go through Prop 218 proceedings is a difficulty for GSAs, and my understanding is that some have succeeded in their Prop 218 assessments. And others have not succeeded in their Prop 218 assessments. I believe one GSA is going through a second effort at a Prop 218 proceeding for a groundwater extraction fee. So my understanding is that it's not impossible, but it is difficult and does have to go through the process and get the consent, if not approval, of the voters.
Thank you, Amanda. Yeah, we had another question in the back.
Chuck. Hi, my name is Don Wright. I'm a reporter with Water Rights. My first thing I'd like to say, I'm pretty happy to see 4 out of 5 of you up here. And I think that's kind of communicating to us your willingness to have a fair listen. But I want to ask you, the board, a rhetorical question first, then I have some specific questions for the staff. On page 126 of the letter that staff wrote and sent, it says, a brief history of the public trust document, or doctrine, excuse me. The public trust doctrine flows to the present from ancient Roman codes and English common law, judicial opinions about public rights to use water, air, wildlife, and common spaces that are held in trust by the sovereign for the benefit of the public. The next sentence written is, the sovereign here is California. So, are we subjects or are we citizens? Because to imply that the state is sovereign is to imply that the state board is sovereign and that this is not a democracy. So that was my first comment. Why is that an important comment? Because you're here to establish trust, and I think you may want to be a little more careful with your wording. My second question is, the figures from the DWR and from your guide, when extrapolated out, $30 million is a pretty good guess of what the first year of your fines and punitive measures are going to be, or non-punitive, excuse me, you said. $30 million for this area in 2024 kicks in if you divide it, if you decide it's probationary. Where does that money go? Is that going to go back to well mitigation, or does it fall into the black hole of the government? I'd like to know where that money's going. And the other question is, don't you have to have legally give notice before you can schedule a hearing under SGMA? And my last question is just the executive comment of that letter, the executive section of that letter was full of words like racial equity, public trust. Where is your authority to invoke this? It's not in SGMA. Thank you.
Staff catch a question in there that you want to respond to?
Thank you. We appreciate those questions. Were several in there, so we'll do our best to answer them. But if we miss anything, I apologize. And if there's any further questions in there that we missed, please feel free to reach out and we'll work to get you an answer. Regarding where the money goes, the fee funds that are collected go to a fund in an account. It's a sub-fund of the Water Rights Fund, which some people here may be familiar with, and that is funding that is used only to fund our program. So it doesn't go into back into the general fund or anything like that. The statute requires the State Water Board to recover the costs of the program, and that is what the intent of those fees are. If we do find that we collect more money than is needed to fund the program, then we have the authority to adjust those fees. And in any situation where the fees aren't adequately or are more than adequately covering the cost, we can adjust those appropriately, and we'll do so. So I believe that hopefully answers the question regarding where the money goes. I heard a question in there about legal notice for the hearing. The notice was what we issued on October 12th and 13th. Following the statute, we issued it to cities, counties, the Department of Water Resources, and our electronic mailing list. We were required to issue that notice at least 90 days before a hearing. We were required to notify all of the known or proposed pumpers in the basin at least 60 days, and we did that with our mail out on the 13th. Now I'll hand it over to Amanda to address the questions around public trust.
I will also address the question regarding language regarding racial equity in the draft staff report. And as far as that goes, I will say that SGMA does designate roles for the State Water Board as part of the state backstop. And the State Water Board, as an agency of the state of California, does have a commitment to racial justice. Sorry, I've been told to go slower for the interpreters, I'm sorry. And the statements in the draft staff report to the effect of protecting or acknowledging concerns regarding racial justice are consistent with the board's mission. I will also say thank you for the comment about the public trust doctrine language. The reference to the state as a sovereign under the public trust doctrine is really just a term that is used in the public trust doctrine. It is not meant to suggest that the citizens of California are in fact subjects. Thank you. I will also note just quickly here that we're doing Q&A now, but there will also be a separate opportunity for comments. So anybody who thinks that they might have missed something that they wanted to say or have a comment that they don't want to raise during the Q&A period, there will be an opportunity for that as well.
Thank you again for the comment, and actually for the perfect segue, because we do officially need to start the public comment portion now. But I want to just let you know that if you did want to ask a question, that if we don't take up the entire hour of public comment, that we can open it back up to any questions that we didn't get to during the brief Q&A portion. So I see one card back there, and if there's multiple, I invite the runners to bring them up to me so I can call folks' names to come to the queue. Just the cards. If there's cards, that would be fine. But if If the gentleman is ready to go ahead and provide your comment, you can come up here. Sure, yes. Thank you. Thank you. And we can maybe should we turn this? Turn this way. Thank you. Okay, let's stand on that side. Thank you. And here's my microphone.
Well, good evening. My name is Doug Verboen. I'm a fourth generation family farmer. Excuse my voice, it's been shot from a busy weekend. I'm also elected official here in Kings County. I'm a county supervisor, and water's a big deal here. And I'm happy that we had a big group show up tonight. I know there wasn't a lot of notice for us. I know as a public official, we have certain guidelines we have to follow, and I hope that next time we stretch a little bit more and reach out to more people. But a couple of things you forgot on your slides is how did we get here today, and where do we think we're going to go till tomorrow? So if you think back about in '63 when President Kennedy dedicated the San Luis Reservoir, that provided water to the farmers on the southern San Joaquin Valley. People developed ground on the west side of the valley, and it benefited all of our communities. It generated revenue, which helped our communities, paid for our sheriff, paid for our fire, paid for our human health services, paid for our behavioral health now, didn't exist then. And then in '85, we had Metropolitan Irrigation District come down here in Monterey with Stuart Resnick and create the Monterey Agreement, which took water away from the west side farmers. They still farmed, but they had to start pumping more. So what that created was now the value of water is increasing over time. And then you throw in the biological opinion, which the Delta Smelt came in and took water away from the farmers. So now we have big corporations on the west side farming thousands of acres, and they're doing all they can just to survive. And it's causing a depletion of groundwater. So if we don't fix that part of it, this won't make any difference at all. I farm 180 acres. There's a guy in the back of the room who farms over 100,000 acres. The way we farm is completely different. To come together with 5 GSAs to get 1 GSP is almost impossible. We need some guidance. We need some concessions from all 5 GSA members. They're here tonight, they're listening. Someone's gonna have to give something up if we're gonna be here in 20 years. So I ask you, listen to the people tonight, and I ask the people, I tell them thank you for coming, and ask questions. Tell them how you have to farm. My farming is completely different than most people's, but I still want to farm. One thing we did here in the county, it took us 12 years, we created an ordinance to prevent the sale of groundwater out of our county. The value of water has increased so much it doesn't pay to use it for farming. So if you're going to plant a crop and not get water, or not even get your crop out of the Port of Oakland, why don't you sell your water and then live happily ever after? The gentleman Anthony from Coachella. So we have people from Coachella here on water boards in our county. Why would that be? Because they're coming and getting our water. That has to stop. So look at the facts, look at all the reasons how we got here today and where we're going to go. Kings County is 153,000 people. We produced in 2022 $2.5 billion worth of farming income. That supports our health and human services, our behavior health. I see self-help is here today. I really don't want self-help to have a bigger job of what they can handle. They have their hands full now. But we need to take care of the farmers because they take care of us. So, thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Verboen. So the next name that I have up is Steve Jackson. If you would like to come up and share your comment. And if there are any other cards, let us know so we can come grab them and I can list your name off. Oh, I'm going to get this one to just say that you have a card. Okay, go ahead.
That's quick.
Okay.
Yeah, it's Steve Jackson, Next Gen Water. I had the privilege of serving on 2 of the GSA boards for 5 years, and we had quite a journey in adopting our plan. I just want to speak to subsidence. As you know, that was probably our single biggest issue here in Tulare Lake that we had to deal with. We had quite lengthy discussions at board level, and then as a GSA as coming up with a plan. So I just want to make sure the board and staff understands that this is an issue that we have grappled with, It's one that we're going to have, I think, a continued issue that we're going to have to sort out. But Tulare Lake is not it's not walled off. So we recognize that this is an issue that we're going to have to deal with on a regional-wide basis. And I want to make sure that we think through that as we go through this probationary hearing. It's very important that I myself want to preserve as much of our farmland as Doug mentioned. I want to preserve as much as possible. Subsidence, I think, is an issue that we understand that it's a problem, but we ask the board, tread lightly as you look at this issue. We need time to sort it out. We don't know all the impacts, and it's an issue that I think could really hurt all of us. I know myself, I farm also in Tulare Lake, in Tulare County, and ground that we developed back in the 60s and 70s, we've replaced every well, which is 15 miles east of us, below the clay. And I would venture to say most of the farmers, landowners have done the same thing going down the Highway 99. So it's an issue that it's very important that I think that the board needs to weigh that issue, because subsidence is, I think, something that we're going to have to really work with long term. So that's it. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Jackson. And next we have Jim Verboon. And I would like to go ahead and invite Johnny Gailey to come up to the queue to speak next. Go ahead.
Thank you. I'm Jim Verboon. I farm just across the river from this basin. And I hear lots of talk about funding and tax raising and assessments. I haven't heard anything about addressing the water issue. You know, we have a descending water table that's been around here for an awful long period of time, and along with that water table going down, our ground is going down, causing the subsidence is caused by the overpumping. I didn't hear anything about an interim plan. I didn't hear anything about curtailing any of the overpumping that we know is occurring. A lot of that groundwater pumping is suspected to be pumped to be exported from our county. And we certainly, groundwater rights are overlying groundwater rights. That means it's to service the overlying ground around it, not to be pumped from a well that's 2,500 feet deep, runs 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, sometimes 365 days a year. Now that water can't be used in the overlying ground because you'd saturate it. So I don't hear anything about that. So that's going to continue to occur. It's going to continue to impact our groundwater levels here. They're going to continue to go down, and the water is going to continue to migrate to those deeper wells. And so I hear a lot of talking about funding and projects. I don't hear anything about the actual environment of the water. So, you know, that's the deficiencies. Where are the deficiencies that they're being predicted regarding the water? Not the funding deficiency. We know all about that with our 30-cent walnuts last year. You know, and it cost us 20 cents to dehydrate and harvest. And I didn't realize we could grow walnuts that cheap. And in reality, we can't. We lost our ass. So anyway, I'd like to have a little more discussion at some point as to what we're going to do to address the actual environmental issue, the groundwater tables. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Verboon. I think, so I had Johnny Gailey. You provided an attached document. Is that you? Okay, great.
Yeah, hi there. I'm Johnny Gailey. I live in Visalia. Have a lot of family that farms here in the Tulare Lake Basin and also in Tulare County. I wanted to comment a little bit first about just the process here. Being first in line for a brand new regulatory process puts this sub-basin really at a disadvantage to the other ones that have been deemed as incomplete by DWR. I would like the state board to take that into consideration. The GSAs here are actively working to try to address the issues. They're working One of the GSAs for sure has demand management in place. The other ones are working on demand management problems. I think everybody's really trying hard to get to sustainability. The law in SGMA gives us till 2040 to become sustainable. Nothing in the draft report seems to indicate that we're allowed that time. It seems like they're trying to get us there right now. As Mr. Verboen said, we have $1 billion ag industry, and this is going to impact it significantly. So we really need to be conscious of that. It's one thing to have a dry well. It's another thing to not have a job. So that's my comment for now.
Thank you for your comment, Mr. Daly. So I'd like to invite Diana Zagara to come up. I can bring you the mic, yeah. You don't want a mic. You do want a mic?
You want to give me a mic?
Yes, I would like to.
Oh, okay. Okay. I was just, I went to the one online, and I went to, I'm here today, and I know that the recommendation is to go to well meters, but I just wanted to input that evapotranspiration data has been studied in American universities for a very, very long time, and it's recognized by California because they have a program or a system in place called CIMIS, and it stands for the California Irrigation Management System, but it's heavily relied upon in the universities as reliable.
Thank you for your comment, Ms. Zagara. And we have a card from Dennis Mills. Come on up. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Well, to the board, thank you guys for coming down. Thank you, staff, for the presentation. Thank you for putting this event on down in Hanford. I know you had an option to do this all online and not do this local event. I appreciate that you came to us and sat with us and went through it. It's very helpful. What I do want to communicate to you this evening is that the GSAs in the Tulare Lake Sub Basin are working on a revised plan. We want to revise the plan. We want to get it back to you before the April hearing. To be quite honest, it's a pretty big laundry list that we received in the staff report. And so there's some challenges there. The work in front of us is pretty significant going into the April probationary hearing. But we feel confident that we can get something back to you prior to that hearing. We would ask that whatever we get back to you before that hearing, you consider. Right? We've heard various things about a 4 to 6 month time frame for review before any plan could be evaluated. Given the constraints in this particular instance, man, that ensures that we're going into probation. I would ask that you make every effort to try to review the revised plan before the probationary hearing. We have a number of really interesting challenges in the sub-basin. We've got 3 aquifers. One of them is very shallow and is basically just a perched layer. And then we've got 2 primary ones, one that is above the Corcoran clay and one that is below. We call them the B and the C zone, right? We lettered them, the A, the B, and the C zones. Interestingly enough, each one of those zones has different problems or different issues. They're not really problems, they're just issues, right? So the B zone and the A zone have issues related to domestic wells. The C zone mostly has an issue with subsidence. But think about what I just said. If we don't have a complete understanding of where the wells are and how deep each one of the wells are, our management strategy won't fully address the issues in the different zones. We'll always be guessing. So one of the things that the locals have been trying to do for some time is to develop what we've called a well inventory, right? We've been trying to work with local parties to identify all of the wells in the area because we kind of understood a while back that that was going to be the only strategy that we could use to really manage what was in front of us. But getting that information is very difficult. Even some landowners don't understand how deep their wells are. Those records, for whatever reason, haven't been preserved over time. It makes more sense if you think about it in terms of a domestic residence, a residence that's been sold from one party to the next. If that residence was established in 2000 and was then sold again in 2010 and sold again in 2015, the current owner may have no idea how deep their well is, other than they've been working with a pump company whenever issues show up. So everybody has a guess on what their well, how deep their well is, until it goes dry. And then they really know, right? Once it goes dry, then we start to look at it a little more closely, and then they really know. But what I'm pointing out is that there's a pretty significant data gap that we have. And that data gap is not unique to the Tulare Lake Sub Basin. It is through the entire South Valley. And as I look across the valley, I see this exact same issue in the Cahuilla and the Tule and the Kern sub basins, right? Where we don't know exactly where all of the wells are, and we don't know how deep all of the wells are either. We're developing strategies that talk about how much can we pump sustainably from this aquifer, which would be the B zone, how much from this aquifer, which would be the C zone, and then how much in this top one, which is the A zone, which is really the most kind of fragile one, right? That shallow perched one is difficult. There's always water there, but when we pull on it too hard, then wells start to go dry, and then the water just comes back magically the next year. And so it's difficult. That one's going to take some art and finesse to manage. Right? Hopefully that makes sense. The others we think are a little more straightforward, although the technical evaluations for subsidence at this point are probably as much art as they are science, because that's really cutting edge stuff. What we plan to propose back to you is going to be a living, learning document. We'll be beginning to manage things and trying to get these undesirable results under control, but we will be learning things as we do that. And so the concept of triggers was never something that was very comfortable locally, because we didn't exactly know what triggers we should be proposing. We know that you need them. We know that that's how we're going to be judged. So we'll be putting triggers in for those. That makes it much more difficult locally for all of these folks, because as soon as we start telling them that there are triggers, that new restrictions become, they start asking us, well, how do we plan? How do I do this if you're going to constantly be changing things underneath our feet? So we will be trying to navigate that and provide some balance, right? Provide as much clarity as we can with triggers that help people understand when things would happen and why, but also forecast a road forward of how this will look and how it will work. Does that make sense? Hopefully the staff thinks that makes sense too. Anyway, thank you for your time. I appreciate you coming. It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mills, for your comment. I don't see other comment cards. Here we go. You're welcome to come up. Mr. Mr. Jamie Bell.
Hello. Subjects is exactly how I feel that we are treated from the people up in Sacramento that seem to want to rule over us. There's across the world, there's a globalist leftist agenda to get rid of farmers. In Holland, they use the excuse of a weed. Maybe it's a flower or whatever. Anywhere, they make an excuse to shut down the farmers because they don't like independence, they don't like independent people, they don't like independent thinkers. And that is what I believe this is all about. Because Sacramento doesn't care if we dry it up. They could care less. They dump, I don't know, over 5 million acre feet of water in the ocean every year, and more sometimes. So I think what all the farmers here should have done in the first place, and it's never too late, is to tell the state, here's our plan, go F yourself.
Thank you, Mr. Bell. And we have a card from Margaret Larones. And I'm going to go ahead and call the next person to feel free to come up when Margaret wraps up her comment. And that is Kate Pallas. Is that how you say it? Okay, great. Go ahead.
Thank you. I'm Margaret Larones. I'm a resident of Corcoran. And about 5 years ago, it was a wet winter, and our water district organized a levy for the levy. We all paid extra taxes to build up the levee around Corcoran. And about 5 years later, this past winter, another wet winter, and that levee that we just built a few years ago is no longer high enough. And this time the state came and funded raising the levee. So the subsidence, we hear about water sales, about people making big profits from selling water. A lot of the crops that are grown in this county are very valuable and are also exported to other countries. There's just a limit to how much water can be pumped, and we are all subsidizing the profits of the individuals and corporations who are profiting from selling the water. So water has to be managed sustainably so that we and our children and grandchildren can all continue to use it in a responsible way. And I appreciate the state coming and helping to manage this situation, because what we've been doing is not sustainable.
Thanks. My name's Kate Pallas. I'm a consultant who's been working with SGMA since it really started, and a lot of my work's here in the San Joaquin Valley. I originally had this posed as a question, but it actually is more appropriate as a public comment. So it's written as a question, but we'll just keep that in mind. I'm going to read this verbatim because if I have this mic, I will talk forever. So it sounds like a submitted GSP is required for improvements to be considered in the probationary determination. Recognizing that staff and the board require an affirmed commitment from the GSAs to address deficiencies in place of a full GSP submittal and review, would the staff and board be open to considering GSP revisions documented and publicly reviewed in GSA resolution approved chapters? For example, most GSPs have a chapter regarding sustainable management criteria and maybe even a separate mitigation plan. Could these documents undergo the public process and GSA approval and commitment? Oh, I'm sorry. As I'm like looking down, sorry. Yeah, you're good. I'll just put it quickly. Would it be okay to submit chapters? And they would, again, go through the public process, through the stakeholder process. They would go out for public comment, including through the state board, and the commitment would be documented through a GSA resolution, and a commitment in that resolution to be adding that chapter in the revised GSP. There's just, as someone who's written a ton of GSPs, there's so many subtleties that consume so much of the time, so many administrative efforts, and I think this is one way that we could actually make real progress It wouldn't be delaying the progress. It also makes it more digestible for the stakeholders. So if we have this information going out in chapter-sized chunks, then the affected parties would also have a better chance at digesting and understanding the commitments that they're getting tied into. Thanks. Sorry, I still went really fast. That's okay. The East Coaster and me.
Thank you. Thanks for your comment. If we have time after all the comments wrap up, we might be able to get a response to the question that was in there. Thank you. So I see a card from, I'm trying to read this, I hope I say it correctly. Is it Baron for Juan? Is that correct? I'm sorry. And after you will be Nathan Hiringa. So feel free to come on up and take the mic after this gentleman here. Thank you.
Good evening, staff and state board members, and I do appreciate running down here after a meeting to hear this discussion is important. So first and foremost from my home, because this is where I reside. And I think you're hearing from the group here, and when I wake up every morning, a lot of these people I've grown up with, they wake up in the morning not intending to overdraft, but doing it out of necessity and trying to solve their problems. And so professionally, I practice in the Kauai Sub Basin, and I think I have a question based on what I heard earlier that probably would help me clarify and get ready for other things that are coming. But in this sub basin, there was a determination that there was not going to be a carve out, or what we commonly in the GSA world call the good actor clause, based upon the fact that there was one GSP that was deemed incomplete. But my interpretation of the good actor clause was having the state board's ability to use that function if that region, I think it could be as small as a management area or maybe even a grower per se, achieved that carve out because they were able to achieve sustainability. So it's a metrics based upon ability they had that provision within the probationary period. But it sounds as if the test is your GSP can't achieve sustainability. You can never get it because that's why you're there in probation. So is the test sustainability or is the test the GSP? Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Well, I thank you. I'll wait. I hope I can get an answer to that. Welcome. Make sure you get to Superior Dairy ice cream, and then we'll see you at another event.
My name is Nathan Haringa. I'm a small farmer here, and I appreciate you guys coming down and hearing us out and work for the staff. I have 67 acres, and I'm just speaking on behalf of the 67 acres. I want to make sure you guys hear me loud and clear that I trust the locals here. The GSAs have worked hard. Okay. The GSAs have worked hard, and I trust them. They're technically astute. They also care about this community, and I hope that you will empower them and trust them to do their job. The state agency, I appreciate your comments. I think the comments can be used, but I think you also need to empower and trust the GSAs to do the work that they've been charged to do. They're doing a good job. So I want to make sure you guys hear that. Thank you.
Thank you. And I have a card from, I hope I say this correctly, is it Josie Iroso? Or, maybe not. Please repeat your name when I give you the microphone.
Thank you. Thank you. I feel comfortable because I got my attorney standing next to me, so I think he'll keep me straight. I too want to thank you guys for coming down and listening to us. I want to start off and say I am from I'm from the Tule. I farm in the Tule and Kauai Basin, but I'm over here to support my friends and fellow farmers in this basin. I think, it was said earlier, but we're really all joined at the hip. I think I really represent everybody here because I think everybody here ate a few times today, and I think you're sitting in the middle of the 3 or 4 of the most prolific ag counties in the world. And I think it's important to think about that for a minute because I've had an opportunity to travel around the world a little bit, and We take food for granted here. And places on this planet right now that have the most unrest are because people are starving to death every day. And frankly, sadly, the most appreciation I've ever had for being a farmer was being in a country like South Korea where they depend upon us to grow their food. And when you have little children walk up to you and thank you because they got to eat almonds, it's a luxury there, and they love them. It brought tears to my wife and I's eyes. And so what I want to say here is, and I'll speak for myself and a lot of farmers that are in our area here, but we all understand we're generational farmers. Our family's been here for 100 years. We don't want our kids and grandkids to run out of water either. But having said that, I don't think the state is not at fault for some of this problem. And I would urge you, as we work on our plans and put our plans together, and you know, it's been said a couple of times, these were 20-year plans. And the reason why they're 20 years is because if you guys force this upon all of us tomorrow, the economic impact here to everybody who lives here would be horrific. Despite the fact that we probably would have a lot less food, and it just wouldn't be the right thing to do. And you know, we have a state that, it was said earlier, we haven't did a lot of water infrastructure improvements in our state for 50 years. We got 40 million people living here now. And I'll tell you right now, the farmers don't want anybody to run out of water. And we want to have water, but it's a 40 million person problem. And the voters of California, and I've seen the stats, 90% of the people that live in this state want more water infrastructure improvement. And, you know, SGMA was passed at the same time as the proposition was, and yet here we are how many years later, and we haven't acted on anything because the process mostly gets stalled out. And I don't think it's fair. In all fairness, the proposition, what the people voted for should have ran simultaneous to this so that we could have really worked together, because our only option down here really is to be able to, on wet years like we just had, bring more water down here and save it for everybody in this state, not just the farmers here, but everybody. I mean, in a perfect world, we wouldn't have to pump groundwater. We could farm with surface water, and the people that live here can use the groundwater to drink. So I do think the state has some responsibility there, and I would hope that you guys would really think hard about how not just the implementing making people implement their plans, but also think about how you can assist us in helping us, create the avenue that'll help us fix those, our water situation. So, thank you, appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you. So, next we have Pam Sola, followed by Barry McCutcheon. Thank you.
My name's Pam Sola. We're a family in Lower Tulare Irrigation District in the Tulare Basin, fourth generation farmers, and you scared the crap out of us. You being here, the state agency stepping in, we're threatening to put them on probation, that's scary as heck. And I know I've watched our GSAs. My husband is very involved in the meetings. He practically lives at the Lower Tulare Irrigation District office. And I've seen them work their butts off for the last, since we've implemented it. And it's only been less than 4 years that SGMA's been really going. We're in Block A, right? And I just feel like while the state has many educated people that can offer guidance, the experts in farming and stewardship of this land are sitting out here, they're the farmers. We want our farming to be 5th generation, 6th generation, and to have the sustainable water for that. But I think it feels like a threat. This threat, we're going to put you on probation in April. It's too hard, too fast. It doesn't give us, I feel like, enough time to keep showing that we're pretty good at what we do and we can help come up with some solutions. But give us some time. Don't send in someone that's going to tell us how to run our farms and how to make farming sustainable. We definitely want farming to be sustainable way beyond 2040, way beyond.
Thank you, Mrs. Sola. And Barry McCutcheon, come on up, please. Thank you.
Thank you. I also want to thank you folks for coming down. As prior speakers have very well stated, this is our livelihood. We want to be able to continue and pass it on, God willing, to the next generation. We want water. We don't want to be in a dying field, literally. And I happen to sit on the Kings County Water District Board and also the Mid-Kings River. And we've done a lot this year with the water that we've had. We've sunk probably between 85,000 and 100,000 acre feet of water. We opened up a new basin in January. Just in one basin, we sunk about 7,500 acre feet of water. And we need time. The idea that that we're going to be potentially put under probation, in my opinion, that concept is bogus. We're doing something that takes time. We were told we had 20 years to accomplish a plan. We're worked and have worked and are working very diligently towards accomplishing that plan. It's my understanding that the idea that whatever addendum, if you want to call it, to the plan that we put forward is going to take 4 to 6 months of you folks to go over it with a fine-tooth comb. That's great. Water is a complicated deal. Subsidence is more complicated than that. But to put a hammer over our head and say, well, you're going to go into probation at a cost on top of whatever the GSA is funding, the state would come in and put that on top. I didn't run the numbers from your presentation here on $40 an acre foot of how many acres, feet that we pump, but it looked like a very large number. And as some of my friends and fellow farmers have already stated, the economy right now for farming has been really rough. And the idea that you can just impose or decree something that's going to have a big price tag on it, and we're just going to be able to pay it. It's very tough right now. And but we have a situation where we're striving to understand what we need to do, but the idea that you're just going to lower the hammer on us as a community, I think is wrong. So again, I would thank you for coming down, and as much as the staff may need time to digest stuff, we've needed time to digest stuff, and we're really, and like the prior speaker said, many of them, we want to continue farming. And we need water to do that. And that's where we're at. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. So next we have Rachel Glosser, followed by Eric Hansen. That you?
Not Eric, but Rachel. I'm Rachel. I'm the executive director for the Delta View Water Association, and we represent the white areas or groundwater dependent folks in Kings and Tulare. We're primarily in the Kuya region, but we wanted to be here to support our neighbors and represent agriculture, as important as this is to all of us. I would just ask, and I feel like I'm stating the obvious, but you know, for decades, folks have come out and they've been innovative and they have created the most productive agriculture in the entire state. And that should not go ignored or easily bypassed. And I would just ask on behalf of the white areas and the groundwater dependent folks who provided the food that you ate today, that you consider that you prioritize them, because they are quite literally the experts in their fields.
Thank you.
Yes, go ahead. Hello, my name is Eric Hansen. I'd like to thank the members that came and staff. Takes a great deal of effort and also a fair bit of understanding for you guys to go through this process. This part of the process is, I think, really the best part of the process, and the other part's not so good. But my family and I have been farming in the Corcoran area for over 100 years. I've seen a great deal of things in my life. I'm 52 years old. I've seen the lake fill up 3 times, and this time is a big one for us. We got flooded, but I'm happy to report that a little early, I can beat December 1st. I can tell you that I didn't have any pumping this year. Okay, I know that's not a shock to anybody when you have water sitting in your backyard that you don't have to pump, but it is also kind of interface about what happens when you have surface water available, because there wasn't always a time where we had wells, because wells cost a lot of money, right? Every single one of these people in here that pump, they had to pay a great deal of money to put those wells in. They did it not because they're trying to, beat a stock market, right? They're just trying to feed their families, right? So I would just encourage staff and the board members to take into account these are real people and real economies that are impacted by their decisions. And, hopefully, I know quite a few of the people in the back here have a hard time sleeping at night. While you're making your decisions, probably wouldn't be such a bad idea if you guys lost a little sleep too. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Henson. So next we have Victor Chavarin Jr.
Hello, my name is Victor Chavarin Jr. I am a district representative for Senator Melissa Hurtado. We are following this as closely as possible. We want to thank the State Water Board for hosting this today. The senator wanted me to share, we are hosting a farmer roundtable conversation tomorrow evening at the Tulare County Ag Commissioner Building. Again, it'll be tomorrow evening from 5:30 to 8:30 p.m. It'll be a farmer roundtable conversation with the senator. So we truly hope to see a lot of you there. We could have an open conversation of what's taking place and with our local communities. And thank you.
Great, thank you. Okay, I don't see any other comment cards. Would you like to? Oh, you did? Yeah, just come up. And please, if you would like to share your name, please share your name.
Hello, good evening, everybody. My name is Arshdeep Singh, and me and my family do the farming here in Central Valley. Okay. I wanted to say thank you to you guys like everybody else, but to be honest, I will reserve that today. I cannot even count to the numbers, like the amount of meetings, GSPs, GSAs, different departments we attended in last 3 years. Okay, we say the same things, and generally the feeling is it's going on the deaf ears and nothing is happening. Okay, even today I was really eager to see the presentation you guys were doing it, but every presentation doesn't matter who is doing it. Okay, they talk about the numbers. Okay. Like me and my dad and my uncles are there sitting here. We are not smart enough to understand everything you guys are presenting. We know how to grow citrus and nuts. That's our expertise, right? And when you guys, not only you guys, everybody else comes in and they present these numbers and they tell us, okay, you only have this much water. Okay, right? We want a sustainable solution for everybody. And so then what? They said, you cannot pump the water. If you're going to pump the water, these are the penalties and the fees, which we cannot afford. Everybody knows it, right? They said, okay, so that will have a severe impact on our families. Not only me, everybody sitting in this room. So what's the plan for those impacts? They said, no, we are not going to talk about that. The signal says this, or we are only talking about this. So my comments today to you guys are on two issues. Again, I said I'm not smart enough, but I know how one way to fix the problem is bring more water here. And I don't need to tell you guys, but we know there's nothing done in the last 50 years on that, okay? So that's one of the things I will ask you guys to seriously consider it. And the other thing is the sustainability of our families and our livelihood. It doesn't matter how good your plans and everything will be. If we are not here in 2040, it's no good. Then water table might be stable, but we won't be here to live here. Nobody else will be, okay? Because the way things are going, we won't be able to survive next 5 years. Again, I know you guys can do it. You have all the data and the resources to do it. But please consider all the impacts we're going to get it with all these changes. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to wait a moment in case anyone has a card, wants to make a comment. I think we will need to implement our timer this time, just because it's going to be short. Okay. Thank you.
I just wanted to say I did actually run the numbers that Barry was talking about for the $40 fee. And based on the last 4 years of pumping data that were turned in and submitted to the DWR, the numbers would have been a low of $14,268,000 in fees collected based on the $40 and the $300 per well, and upwards of $25,376 per year. So that's a lot of money coming out of the local economy.
Thank you. Are you coming up? Okay. Thank you. Hi,
Hi, my name is Rosalinda Alexander, and I'm a field representative for Assemblyman Devin Mathis of the 33rd District. He represents Kings County, Tulare County, and a bit of Fresno County, which are huge ag industries. I'd like to mention that 80% of the valley is Hispanic. As I travel around the district, District 33, many of our small rural towns are completely made up of the agricultural workers. These farmers are amazing stewards of land and are also employers of an entire industry and many towns that are working very diligently in fields, spraying the fields, picking, packing houses. The ag industry is what makes up the valley. And if we don't have water to grow food, and we don't have those jobs, the valley disappears and our entire infrastructure disappears. I know it is the elephant in the room that doesn't get mentioned. I heard Supervisor Verboen, the access to Shasta water is very important. That is what has kept us from overdrafting groundwater. So I ask that as the Water Board continues to work on the sustainability of our state and its water, that the workers behind all of it are also going to be greatly affected.
Thank you, Ms. Alexander. And as you notice, we did have to start using the timer because we are getting near the end. So are there any other comments? Okay, we have another comment. We'll restart the timer. Yeah, watch your step, please. Thank you.
This is Don Wright again. Just like to say that on average, the state of California allows 10 million acre feet to flow out to sea on average through the delta, above regulatory, above environmental needs. We need about 2 million more acre feet here in the valley to completely mitigate sigma for our recharge and to keep us in line. This is a doable thing. We haven't had any new major infrastructure in 60 years. There's 16 million people when it was built. There's 40 million here now. We could put in new fish screens, just new fish screens at the state and federal pumps and get that 2 million acre feet per year and not have this discussion. And I just would like everybody to know, and you guys are considerate, this is a doable possibility. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wright. Would anyone else like to make a comment? Okay.
Okay, my name is Mike Hagman. I'm three roles. I'm a farmer in the Eastern Tulare GSA, small farm, and I run a water district in the East Kauai, and I'm the executive director for the East Kauai. And my friend Aaron Furwan Fakuda, he lives here in Kings, so I have a nexus between all three of those subbasins. We're working really hard to accomplish sustainability. We've worked with our landowners. They know us. They trust us. They're trying hard to overcome overdraft. That's our problem. We're overdrafting. We're part of the problem. The state's, it'd be nice if you could fix the surface water supply, especially on the west side. But we've developed relationships with our landowners. As a little boy, I lived outside of Chico up in the mountains. Most of that's now black. But we had to go down this road, and this old drunk guy lived in the first house, and his dog would come out all the time. He was about as grouchy as the guy, and he would chase our car, and I'd ask my dad, why is the dog doing that? And my dad would say, well, someday he's going to catch us. And I think the state, you don't realize how many, you're the dog that caught the car. I think you caught their tire, so you'll be flopping around because I've got about 9 9,000 landowners, each of them using a well. That's a lot of information to try and digest. We've been doing it. We're good at it. We've gotten really good at it. We've connected with our landowners, and we're working on the problem. I know in the algebra sense, we didn't show our work well enough, and we have some work to do in there, but stay your effort a little bit. Give us a chance to kind of work through our problems. We don't want to be overdrafting. We want to be in our GSA, and in our sub-basin, 2 of our GSAs are already at allocating sustainable yield, and we're below that in the East Cahuilla. So it's being done, but I just ask that you give us a little bit of time. I know it's not our turn yet, but I sense that these folks are doing the same kind of hard work that we've done. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other comments?
Tony DeGroat, farm here in Kings County. Just to be a little bit real, and all these people are sitting here because it's real to them. Agriculture is tough at times, and even though we've had a great winter, a lot of rain, we still had a tough year. I'm in the dairy business and farming. Planted Nuts to Diversify. It's another nonprofit organization that I established. Don't know why I did that, but in reality, I had a conversation with our banker this morning, trying to figure out how are we going to make up for the deficit that we've just had this year. We've had some of our crops drowned this year. So it's a blessing to have extra water. It's not so good to have your crops drowned, and now I have to go and buy that feed. So I have the double whammy going on at the same time. But it's going to be tough. Now, one of the things that I've heard people mumble about a little bit is, well, we'll just tax them till they can't farm. And that's what it feels like to us farmers. We're not working on the solution. We're just going to tax them till they can't pump water. Once we're broke, we can buy that ground for 50 cents on the dollar, maybe even 20 cents on the dollar. And they'll never farm it again because now the state of California can own it. That's not a way of being prosperous for us here in the county. So if you could just keep that in mind, we need higher solutions. It's been mentioned already, the water going to the ocean, different things of that. And that's not the only reason. You know, there's many things that we can do, and we are doing them. We're doing subsurface drip irrigations, just different cropping patterns for that matter, crops that won't take as much water. So we are working on things. You've heard other people say too, we want to be part of the solution, and we can be part of the solution, but don't hang it all on our backs is what our questions are. We didn't vote to hurt anybody in Sacramento. We beg for them not to hurt us at the same time. So thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to make a comment? And if not, we can take some time to answer some of the questions that were included in comments. Comment? Okay.
Yes, please watch your step. My name is Carlo Wilcox. I'd like to pivot off of something that Don Brown said. He mentioned the quantity of water that is allowed to go to the ocean. Between the state water project and the federal water project, the water we need to balance our groundwater could be picked up with no real upfront capital cost. I thought that's kind of an interesting concept, and a lot of that water is going to waste. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm trying to, I wanted to flatten that before you walk. Too late. Okay. So, Thank you, and as always, feel free to come up to the podium if you have any comments. Otherwise, I might pass it back over to staff if you want to address any of the questions that were asked during the public comment.
Okay, so I'm trying to remember the questions that we got. Louder. Okay, the first one was your question about submitting portions of plans one after the other. I appreciate that suggestion. In some instances, it might not work out because if there is a proposal to set a criterion at a certain number, that would allow to drop a water level. It might not be reasonable without, this is just an example, so this isn't a requirement, but if there's a well mitigation plan that needs to go with it, and that's in another section, we'd really need to evaluate the two together to understand the situation and be able to make a recommendation to our board members. Also, where water levels are set for one undesirable result or potential one, if you look at subsidence, that might need to actually be somewhere else. And so there's a bit of interplay. So really we need to see the plan together to understand how all the parts fit together. I really appreciate that suggestion and I'm open to more discussion. But it would be a bit challenging. Okay, and the other question was from Aaron Fukuda, who was asking if you had to have a groundwater sustainability plan to qualify for the exemption. This is a bit of a complicated legal answer, but I can say that the statute says that the board can exempt parts of the basin where there is a plan that meets the sustainability goal for the basin. So to Aaron's question, it doesn't necessarily have to be a GSP, but there does need to be a plan. So again, that's a bit of a complex legal answer, and I'm happy to follow up at another time to discuss further.
Hey, if there's one thing I am, it's tenacious. So I don't want to give up on the chapter idea, so I did want to politely respond. I understand that there's, these documents are complete, and one chapter isolated may not give the full complete picture. In the case, I know these plans like the back of my hand because that's all I've been doing for the past 7 years. So anyway, in the case of the Sustainable Management Criteria chapter, I agree that a mitigation program or plan document would be needed to complement that. Now, all the sustainability indicators would be identified within that same chapter, and any subsequent information that would be helpful, we could add that as an appendix. I still think it's a strategy that we should keep on the table. I just wanted to plant that seed. Can we have more conversations about it before we throw in the towel? Okay.
Thank you. Okay, that was all the questions, right? Okay, great. So we can move on to our wrapping up our slides and next steps. So I don't think I have this. I'm going to turn around to read the slide because I don't have it in my notes. So just a reminder about the schedule in case you missed it the first time. The water boards released the draft staff report on October 12th. There was a notice sent to all known pumpers on October 13th. The public comment period opened on October 12th and will wrap up on December 11th. And then we had a virtual workshop on November 3rd. And today we are having our November 8th workshop or stakeholder meeting. And in March, the water boards will release the final staff report and issue a draft resolution. And again, on April 16th, the water boards will hold a public hearing with a potential probationary designation. So just wanted to go over that one more time, and then we can go to the next slide, which is a reminder that we are continuing to welcome written comments, either electronically to the email address that you see here. This information should also be included on the handout. And you can fax your comments to the number seen here. And they also welcome mail and hand delivery to the address on the slide. And again, comments must be received by December 11th at noon Pacific. So with that, we would like to thank everyone again for coming out this evening, sharing your comments, and for continuing this conversation. Thank you so much.